You are the man who gave them the power to destroy themselves. And the world is not prepared. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
We're going to go ahead and get to my review for Christopher Nolan's film Oppenheimer. Of course, everyone's been hyping this movie up. Everyone's been talking about this film along with the Barbie movie, chap. Barbenheimer, right? And for those that, don't know, the film's synopsis, the plot, it focuses on the American scientist and physicist, J. Robert, I call him Bobby, Bobby Oppenheimer, and his role in the development of the atomic bomb and how it affected his public and personal life afterwards. Before getting into the film itself, there's a lot to discuss with this movie. Believe me, there's a lot. It's 3 hours of it. I did want to kind of share my overall thoughts on Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker for the last 25 years, and what I like about him, and also what I don't like about him. I guess I have to say, Christopher Nolan's been kind of a part of my life for, that length of time. It's kind of crazy to think about that. I've at this point, as I said before, getting this review, I've seen all of his movies, from following all the way up to Oppenheimer, and I have to say, the 2000s. If you asked me, certainly like in 2010, like when Inception had come out, right? I believe it came out in 2010. Correct me if I'm wrong. But if you ask me, like, who is my favorite filmmaker currently working today, right? And it's currently producing, directing movies. I would have said Christopher Nolan. His output throughout the 2000s was absolutely incredible. It's like at that point, I had not seen Following, but I had seen Memento. I had seen Insomnia, Batman Begins, the Prestige, The Dark Knight, and obviously with Inception, culminating in Inception, and that is just an incredible series of films back to back to back, chat. That's impressive. That's a lot of win right there. The consistency was crazy. Like, the quality, in my opinion, was incredible. I can safely say, for all those movies, from Memento to Deception, I can safely say that all those movies are great, to the point where I love those movies. Those movies inspired me and wanted me to be creative, right? And I think for a lot of people, certainly at that time, a lot of budding filmmakers, he was such a huge inspiration. But I have to say, this previous decade, really ever since Dark Knight Rises, I've been kind of disappointed in him as a filmmaker. I didn't think The Dark Knight Rises was a satisfying conclusion to his trilogy, honestly, for a variety of reasons, which I'll get into, including Interstellar. There's things I like about it, a lot of stuff I don't. Dunkirk, beautiful looking movie, just not a lot of heart. And Tenet is his one film I will say is I really dislike that movie. And I think it represents a lot of the worst aspects of Christopher Nolan's filmmaking. And so, leading up to Oppenheimer, I don't know, my expectations weren't exactly high. I did not have, I know a lot of people, believe me, I understand. I know a lot of people have loved the previous decade of Nolan movies. Dark Knight Rises all the way up to Oppenheimer now, right? And for me, I kind of got a little disenfranchised with him. I thought he seemed to be focusing more on the technical aspects of filmmaking, the spectacle, right, and less so on the characters and the storytelling, which he certainly had with those earlier movies in the 2000s. But he was able to weave it with the spectacle too. Certainly that's the case with films like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight and Prestige and Inception. They always nice balance, and I feel like he kind of moved away from that, and I feel like that's because of the fact that he got carte blanche from certainly Warner Brothers at the time, but just studios in general. He's allowed to do anything he wants. And I think just because he didn't have as many limitations, I think it negatively affected his filmmaking, which I know is probably sacrilegious to say because I know a lot of people love it, right? But so with Oppenheimer, I was like, okay, we'll see what you got. Like, I like the fact that, hey, it's telling probably a more personal story, focusing on this individual and the people like around them. I think that was a good sign, right? And even from the market, I was like, okay, that's cool. And it's an interesting subject matter, chat. I mean, J. Robert Oppenheimer is a incredible figure, influential figure, controversial figure, and so that in itself would probably make like an interesting story, right? Even before seeing the movie. And so that intrigued me. I can definitely say that interested me. And it's been the other side of this. It's been really amusing to just see the recent phenomenon that is Barbenheimer. These two films that released the same weekend. Couldn't be more different from each other, chap. But I don't know, seeing like these two communities come together, all sorts of film fans saying that we're going to see both of these movies, even though they could not be more starkly different. That's been kind of fun to see. It's been amusing to watch, and there's been a lot of, I think, just positivity and love for film. Like people share love for film that's been coming out and that's been revealed, and I like that. We see that across social media. We see that in person. Like when I saw like during my review when I saw Barbie, people were dressed up like in pink and all that. And when I went to go see Oppenheimer, everyone was like dressed so dark. No, I'm joking. No one was dressed in period like 1940s clothing for Oppenheimer, but it's been very amusing to see, and I like it, and I like that. I know some people must be sick of it by now. And I think by then I don't want this to keep going forever, but it's an interesting pop culture phenomenon that I'm trying to think of if there's been like a similar case in my lifetime of watching film where this has kind of happened. And I certainly can't think of anything. I'm curious if they'll continue on with something else. But it was interesting. It's been interesting, chat. But getting to the film itself, Oppenheimer itself. As someone who has been frustrated by Christopher Nolan's more recent movies, I can happily say, I'm very happy to say, that this film is closer to a lot of his earlier works from the 2000s, mostly because it is so character focused. Although it's being labeled as a spectacle movie or a blockbuster, I disagree with that personally, and I'll go into that more later on in my review. I'm just so happy to actually have interesting lead characters and also supporting characters in a Nolan movie again. Like I can't remember like the last time I had that, or I felt interested and compelled by the people that I'm seeing on screen in his movies. And this is kind of realized specifically with Cillian Murphy, who plays J. Robert Oppenheimer, Bobby Oppenheimer, as I like to call him. He gives one of the best, if not the best, performance of his career as the physicist. We see him as Oppenheimer at different points in his life. And even like the subtle changes in his performance when he's playing like a younger and older version of him throughout the film, I think are fantastic. We see him as this brilliant scientist, this concerned citizen, this asshole, this womanizer. Like every aspect of his performance throughout this entire movie from beginning to end really, really worked for me. And at the same time, they make him... despite like how like you think of it, on the outside of it, or just kind of see it on paper, how are we gonna make this scientist, this physicist, like relatable, right? And how they do it, and it's great, and it's like, oh, it's perfect. They make him very relatable because of his moral dilemma of creating this thing, this amazing thing, this terrifying thing, and that in itself is fascinating to watch. This guy who's grappling with it, where he thinks like I'm doing it for the right reasons, but then when he finally this power is revealed, and it's so intimidating, and it scares him, and we see that through his performance, and he is amazing. He is great, no question. Also, another thing, because I was when I was watching this movie, I kind of at times started thinking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is weird. But you notice how in the movie, like Cillian Murphy, we see him younger and we see him older, and all the makeup that they use on him is great. And there's not a single like layer of CGI like on his face. right? And it just made me think of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, like that opening with Harrison Ford, and he looks like just a lifeless, zombie with all that goop on it. It's like, that's not real. It just doesn't feel like authentic. But you see like him age and you see him younger, all that looks fantastic in the movie. It's like, this is what you should be doing. And again, practical effects. It always ages much better than CGI. Again, this is not a CGI hate fest. Some cases of CGI which I love that are amazing, but it just made me think like this looks incredible, and something like from Dial of Destiny just it didn't. The rest of the cast. Now listen, this is an ensemble cast, and I sometimes have issues with that in movies. But I will say there are some notable standouts among the ensemble cast that I found very impressive. Matt Damon, I think, gives his best performance probably since Ford versus Ferrari, as like General Leslie Grove, who is kind of the American military person who puts together the Manhattan Project. He's very much like a non-scientist member of this group. He's an interesting position because he's trying to protect Oppenheimer and these scientists while also representing the interests of the American military and the atomic bomb. And those two things like often conflict in the movie, and it creates some great conversations and leads to some really cool, compelling scenes in the film itself. Robert Downey Jr., who plays Dr. Lewis Strauss, who I think they say he's the chairman of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. And he was like a fierce critic, sometimes ally of Oppenheimer, is one of the other best performances of this film. He has just like throughout, and he's not in it like a ton, but when he's on it, he's in it. He is so good. He has so much. It just comes across like immediately. He has so much bitterness and simmering just hatred, for Oppenheimer in this film. And it's the type of performance that's just, honestly, it's refreshing to see from Robert Downey Jr. Listen, I loved him as Iron Man. He was fantastic as Iron Man. That is incredible casting. It's like, it's hard to see anyone else in that role. So much so that, like, they draw Iron Man looking like Robert Downey Jr. now. When people voice him in cartoons, right? Iron Man, Tony Stark, he sounds like kind of like Robert Downey Jr. Like, that's an iconic role. But he's been playing that role 15 years and primarily playing that role. Like, he's done other things like The Judge, and he's done like Sherlock Holmes. I'm not a big fan of Sherlock Holmes. Doolittle, right? But also, to amazing effect, Tropic Thunder, right? But it's refreshing to see him just play a completely different character. That is the polar opposite of someone like Tony Stark. And him, Matt Damon, and Cillian Murphy, they're all going to be nominated for awards, when the award season crops up. They're all going to be nominated for Oscars, and I wouldn't be shocked, at least at this point. We'll see what the rest of the award season looks like. Just kind of the playing field, if you will, like who else will be, other great performances. But I mean, like I think they're all in the lead right now, especially Cillian Murphy, and the supporting category, definitely Robert Downey Jr. and Matt Damon. It'll be a battle between the two of them. There are dozens of other recognizable faces, in this movie. You get Benny Safdie in it, and of course, filmmaker, actor. Guy's probably best known for being part of the duo that directed Uncut Gems, Good Time, etc. Jack Quaid, who I'm a huge fan of, love Jack Quaid, love My Adventures of Superman. He's in this. Josh Peck, I'm so glad. I'm very happy for Josh Peck. After kind of coming out of being a child actor, he's appearing in all these movies. It's great. Jason Clarke, Tom Conti, who recently, I think in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which I did for an audio commentary. He plays Albert Einstein, and there's a lot of characters in this movie, and I'm not going to say and every single time they're on screen, it's amazing. It's like, no, it can kind of get overwhelming, and there's a lot going on. But there are a number of actors I still feel like, even though they might get kind of lost in just the sheer amount of faces in this film, they do a good job. And I really like the scenes between Cillian Murphy and Tom Conti, who plays Albert Einstein. Those are some of the more quiet moments, but also like introspective that I really liked. And listen, the movie doesn't hold your hand when it comes to introducing you or even reintroducing you to these characters, and that can be confusing, and this kind of goes back to the whole idea of an ensemble cast, which I always have issues with. Not to say that like every ensemble cast ever has been bad, but I think sometimes like you have these ensemble casts and it feels like it's like stunt casting, or it's like, because we got this name, but then the actor like barely has any lines or has like a scene and then they're gone. Like I think some of the filmmakers I think do ensemble casting the worst is like the Coen brothers. Like for Hail Caesar, it's like, oh, they got Jonah Hill in the movie, except Jonah Hill has like less than 60 seconds of screen time. It's like, what was even the point of that? If anything, you're kind of wasting Jonah Hill. And instead, why don't you just cast another actor who is like an up and coming, or it's like, yeah, give that role to someone else. It's just weird to do that, and it's kind of distracting. And I almost wonder if but I'm of two minds of this. I wonder if Nolan specifically casted like known people and known names for this huge just cast, right, of characters. So in case we just literally don't know who they are in the movie, it's like, oh, it's the Jack Quaid character, or it's the Benny Safdie character, or it's this guy. And then I wonder if that is why he did it. That's the only reason I could think of. So I'm like, why are so many people here if you're not going to really use him all that much? But in any case, I would say the majority of the ensemble cast, they do a very good job in supporting, the film's leads, especially Cillian Murphy and Matt Damon and Robert Downey Jr. The techno side of the film, I gotta say, I'm a little more mixed on it. I think its cinematography is very good, and love the framing. There's just beautiful looking shots in this movie. However, like other recent Nolan films, the sound mixing I think can be quite bad at times. The score, which it's not Hans Zimmer, it's, oh God, what's his name? It's Ludwig Göransson, who I think scored Nolan's other Tenet. Didn't he do Tenet? And he also does like The Mandalorian, I think. Like the score could be good, but there are times when the score gets so loud and there's so much ambient noise that it's drowning out the dialogue. And he's got to stop doing that. That's annoying. It's not as bad as something like Tenet, where it's like consistent throughout the movie, but there were times when it happens in this film. And I don't know why he keeps doing that, because this is a very conversation-heavy movie. Like, there's no doubt about that. Also, I feel like the film is too long, and the pacing I think is definitely off, and especially in the last third. Like the first 2/3 of this movie, I was all in. I was actually really enjoying it for the most part. But the last third of this movie, to me, can almost be like a separate film in itself. It becomes more of like a courtroom drama. And, the initial 2 hours, I think by itself would just make a perfect film about the creation of the bomb. And Oppenheimer is rolling it, and all these scientists and the military is rolling it. That's where I think the movie's at its best. Where and that's where we get to the point where I feel like this movie would have been better, honestly, as like a mini series or like a limited series, like on a premiere, like cable channel, like HBO or something like that, like Chernobyl. I would almost say you like watch both Oppenheimer and Chernobyl. They kind of it's a nice companion pieces, if you will, to each other. It's like we see the creation, the proliferation of nuclear energy, and then we see it being thoroughly abused in something like Chernobyl, right? But because it's such a conversation-heavy show, because they're trying to fit so much material into 3 hours, it's like sometimes it doesn't feel like it's gotten room to breathe, especially in that last hour where I'm feeling like, well, feels like just something completely different. Had this been like, I don't know, like a 5-episode, like Chernobyl, had it been like a 5-episode series on HBO where each episode was like an hour long, I don't know, I think I would have liked it even more, honestly. And I know Nolan is very much, I'm about the theatrical experience, but man, he's better suited for television, honestly. I actually wouldn't mind seeing Nolan move over to television and start telling these types of stories there. I think that might work better, honestly. Because that's the other thing about this, chat. I know this is being promoted as the end-all be-all blockbuster. It's a spectacle. It's a cinematic experience. I have to tell you, I think the spectacle and the use of IMAX seems kind of unnecessary. To me, outside of like a particular scene and maybe a few others, this is more of a conversational film with occasional moments of bombastic sequences, spread across the 3 hours. And that's where and again, that's why I'm saying, like, I think it would have worked better on television, honestly. It's like, not to say like those scenes when you have Suspected was like, oh, it's amazing, but it's like, it's not throughout the entire movie. It really isn't. It's only in a few moments, and most of the time it's people talking, which is fine. I'm saying this as someone who has missed when Christopher Nolan had characters that didn't just feel like props in movies, because no one feels like, for the most part, no one feels like a prop in this movie. They feel like real people, which I think has been missing from a lot of his movies. I think you can make an argument all the way back to something like Dark Knight Rises, but definitely since Dunkirk onward, no doubt about that. Where all those characters in that movie, in Dunkirk, all the characters in Tenet, they did not feel like people, for the most part. They felt like just little figurines in his grand, technical, cinematic world. And I would have preferred this kind of being a TV show or a miniseries. Other thing I want to bring up, this has been kind of a criticism been thrown at Nolan for even back in the 2000s, and at this point I'm just like, I kind of gotta agree. I don't think he knows how to write women very well. He really doesn't. I think Emily Blunt, in terms of the cast, which includes women, I think Emily Blunt is pretty good in the movie, and she has some great scenes, and that's the one female character he seems to be most interested in. But there's a lot of times you kind of forget she's in. I was like, oh, she's back. She has a good moment in the movie. But I have to say, the thing is, Emily, she's a little underutilized, I think, especially for her talents. And it goes back to my point again. It's like, why don't we get some more up-and-coming actresses or someone who's like new and put them in this kind of role? That would be more interesting to me. The one thing I have to say, Florence Pugh, who we all love Florence Pugh, even when she's in something bad, like Don't Worry, Darling. She's great. She's just wasted in this movie completely, in my opinion. And this is probably going to be controversial. I think she shares with Cillian Murphy what is probably the worst scene that I've ever seen in a Christopher Nolan movie. And yes, Chad, that includes Marion Cotillard dying in Dark Knight Rises. And, totally insane. I know Batman is Bruce Wayne. And like, love being the cure to all of humanity's ills in Interstellar. Like that, yeah, you just solved the mathematical problem and it's love. Okay. Or like anytime John David Washington tries to act in Tenet, I really do think it's one of the worst scenes ever. And okay, this is a spoiler right here. So I'm gonna tell you right now, chat. This is a spoiler for this movie. What I consider to be the worst scene in Christopher Nolan's career. You guys all know. What comes to your mind when you think of J. Robert Oppenheimer, chat? It's probably that interview, right, where he references the ancient Hindu text, right? Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds. So that's in the movie. But the context in which is in the movie is so thoroughly bizarre. And I'm like, what are you even doing? So it's first brought up in the film between Cillian Murphy and Florence Pugh. Florence Pugh plays this communist in the movie and a former on-again, off-again lover of J. Robert Oppenheimer, and they go into his communism in the film too. So this is how it's introduced. They're both having sex with each other, and she's like, oh, read this, as they're having sex, and he reads the ancient Hindu text. Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds, as he's stooping her. Now, when I'm watching this in the movie, and I was thinking it, and but I didn't say it, but someone else did. Some brave soul in the theater said this, and I want to thank this person, but also it's like, why? Why did you say it? And this person said, and it was quiet for a moment as he said the line, and he goes, well, he's destroying that pussy. And I'm like, and I was like, yep. And the whole audience chat burst out laughing. And it's like, why would it's so bizarre. Like, now listen, I know you're not going to be absolutely accurate to every aspect of a person's life, in these biopic films. That's a criticism that's often lobbied. I've lobbied at them. But it's like, it is such a bizarre thing to do in this movie, especially because that's the thing that we all think of when it comes to Bobby Oppenheimer. And you ruined it. You absolutely ruined it. And and it was hilarious because then he says later in the film, and everyone started snickering. And it's like, I don't get it. I really don't get it. It's terrible. It's really bad. Some people listen, I'm sure there's an artsy fartsy explanation, and they say, well, it's tied into Florence Pugh character when this thing happens to her. And I'm like, no. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say, like, I'm sure that's maybe Nolan's intention, but it's so unintentionally funny in the film, and it does not work. It does not work at all. It's bizarre. It feels like something like a film student would do, like it's their first film assignment, and like, oh yeah, but the thing is, like that famous quote, it's all about Oppenheimer penetrating and controlling this woman, and this woman doesn't know, what she wants to be, and she's in a society that demeans. It's like, shut the fuck up. What are you talking about? It does not work. And it's so bizarre. And so now, and the thing is, and it kind of sucks, because now when I think of that line, which is, chat, that if you ever seen that interview, you've probably seen the clip of J. Robert Oppenheimer saying that, and that is one of the most impactful, sad, terrifying quotes in the history of the world, certainly in the 20th century, right? It has so much meaning, terrifying meaning, that we have, that this man and has created, and giving us the power to destroy ourselves, And now when I think of that, I'm going to think of Florence Pugh and Cillian Murphy stooping each other and saying, read this now as you fuck me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What? And that guy, that hero going, destroy the pussy. It's weird. I don't get it. I don't know how it could have been written. I don't know why it was shot, and I don't know why it wasn't edited out. It is so bizarre. And listen, yeah, of course, Florence Pugh's gorgeous. There's no doubt about it. You see her big old bazungas and all that chat. But another thing too, and you can say, oh, you're a prude, Chris. It's just like, sex scenes don't really interest me in movies all that much. They're kind of, I don't know, unnecessary, I think, a lot of the times. It's like, even with like romantic movies, like my favorite romantic films don't really have sex scenes, like Silver Linings Playbook, or Big Sick, or like it's implied, such innuendo's implied, but it's not like, it's just stupid. It's kind of weird. And it kind of comes out of nowhere. And again, I think it ruins one of the greatest quotes in the 20th century. And I do not get it. I don't get it. And I think you can make an argument it is the worst scene Nolan has ever shot. And I certainly think that is. Despite that, despite that sequence at the end, or excuse me, not the end, but in the movie, in the end, I still think this is probably Christopher Nolan's best film, in my opinion, since probably Inception. I do think this is better than Dark Knight Rises, all the way up to Tenet, certainly better than Tenet, because it has humanity. Because it is so character focused, because it is so dialogue driven. That's why I think it rises above those other films, because most of them, certainly comes to Dunkirk, certainly comes to Tenet. It is about people, and I really like that. And I'm hoping, as we go into this decade and in the many decades that will follow, that Christopher Nolan is able to have more of a balance as he did in the 2000s, balancing the spectacle and the humanity in his movies, because that's what I personally want to see. I'm selfish. That's what I want to see. All right, if you can manage to balance this and maybe not include scenes like you did. Ruining some of the greatest quotes in human history, then hey, I'm all about it. But I do think this is a very good movie. that has some flaws that might have worked better more as a mini series, a limited series, than like an actual film. But I still think it's very good. I still think it's a very good movie, Chad. And I'm curious to see what Christopher Nolan is going to do next. It's still, I mean, he is that kind of guy where you put his name on something. He's in a rare company. He's in rare company, chat. He's one of the few directors where he puts his name on something and you can sell it that way. And that's pretty special. So I'm always going to respect him for that. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Like outside of him, it's like what Quentin Tarantino, Jordan Peele, even though I'm kind of wafting on that now. I think a lot of people are starting to waft on that. But he's in rare company. So I'm curious to see what he will do. But I enjoyed Oppenheimer, chat. And I think a lot of people will too. But that's my review. What about you guys out there? What did you think of Oppenheimer? Did you enjoy it? Did you have maybe some of the same issues that I had with the film? Or did you not like it at all? Very curious to hear.
I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I want to take the time to tell you about my Patreon, Class in the Glass, which offers hundreds of film commentaries and video reactions to numerous movies, TV shows, and cartoons. If you're a fan of shows like Batman the Animated Series and Avatar The Last Airbender, or films like Aliens and Raiders of the Lost Ark, my Patreon is the platform for you. Currently, I'm doing a subathon to reach 75 subs on the platform. If we hit 75 subs, we'll be able to start voting on the next edited YouTube reaction, which will include actual clips and scenes from the movies and shows I comment over. Choose from such films as Fire and Ice, Masters of the Universe, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, or Spawn. Subscribing at any tier level is appreciated, and feel free to give feedback at any time. Thank you again for watching the video, and see you next time.